Okay, good morning. Get the balance right on the microphone. There we go. Cool. Welcome, everyone, both to those of you here in Plymouth in person and those just joining us online. It's a real pleasure, honestly, to welcome you all to Secure Southwest 17, ESG through a cyber lens. And it's absolutely fantastic to be here in Plymouth University in this great venue overlooking the city. We've had a brilliant response to this event. We sold all the in-person tickets, which is fantastic. And we've got about a couple of hundred expected online, dipping in and out throughout the day over the course of the 3 sessions. So again, really good response to this event. I know you've come to hear from our excellent speakers and not me, but there are a few things I need to cover before we get started. In case of a fire, emergency exits, basically follow the green signs straight out, down the stairs and out the way you came in through the main exit. There are also fire exits on the ground floor as well. And the rendezvous point for us is Portland Villas. Basically, follow the staff, they'll track you down. But if you keep your lanyards on and your passes, that means we'll know that we've got everybody and we can keep track of everybody. Hopefully everyone's found the toilets and tea and coffee and everything else. But if not, out through the door the way you came in, and either turn left and go around the building or turn right and go around the building, and you'll find them. Tea, coffee will be in there, lunch as well. Just to ask reversed, we've ordered nut-free, gluten-free, vegetarian, vegan, etc., etc. So there's a huge range of options available. If anyone, however, the kitchen can't guarantee being nut-free. So please, if anyone does have any severe allergies, please let either Jeff at the back there or myself know, and we'll help you get sorted out. Just going back to the fire piece, there's no planned alarms today, though, however, we have been informed that at some point during the day there's something very large being craned into the building. We know no more than that, so it's not likely to affect us, but just in case, or you see something strange swinging past the window, that's what's going on. Questions and so on, please hashtag SSW17 on any social media you make. And we've got Slido going on. So again, questions, obviously raise your hand or put them through on Slido. And our team, Andy and Chelsea at the back, will pick those up and share them with the speakers. We do have panel sessions for each of the sessions. That's too many sessions in there, but there we go. So if you can, please hold your questions for the panel and ask them as a group. It just helps the flow of the event go through. And if you haven't picked up on it, there is a guest Wi-Fi network, which is UOP Visitor. So that is available should you need it. Last one on the admin side of things, photos. Chelsea will be taking photos for social media throughout the day. So please, if anyone does not want to be photographed or they want their left side to be photographed rather than their right side, please let us know and we'll obviously factor that into our postings and our photographing. So, our conference. It's a real privilege to be able to chair today's event. I've been involved with the cluster since moving back to Devon about 3 years ago. Though having served on 2 Plymouth-based ships during my time in the Navy, it does actually feel like coming home. And from a Devon perspective, it actually feels like we've always lived here, which I think says a lot about Devon and its place as a community. For me, cybersecurity is a second career, though it's been a common thread through much of what I've done for about 30 years. And I focus on operational technology and critical infrastructure. However, for me, it's a huge opportunity to be part of a great community like the Southwest Cybersecurity Cluster. And I was honoured to be able to take over as chair from Robin in November last year. For those of you attending for the first time, a special welcome to the community and ecosystem that is the cluster. We're a friendly bunch, and we aim to promote cybersecurity links networking across the Southwest. Actually, should have been clicking. There we go. Our mission is to support cybersecurity and raise that knowledge. For those that have been involved with us for a while, you know we've been kind of refining our mission and our sort of standing. And this is kind of the latest iteration of it. And we wanted, one of the elements of feedback we got was actually that people wanted to be able to more explicitly support both society in particular and business in general. So that, and bring their skills forward and help, benefit and get it right. And that's what led us to this exploration of ESG and what that means in relation to cyber. It's a new focus for us as a cluster, which you can see it sits on that left-hand pillar there, and actually looking to explore that and why it's the theme for this conference today. I've certainly seen it as a growing question across the community, how to demonstrate the value of cybersecurity to a business. And it's valid both for an individual, professionals, and cybersecurity teams. From my perspective, sounds silly, but we must move forward from the department of no, from information security, cybersecurity, and articulate the case for cybersecurity being both good business and adding value to the business. I know I don't have all the answers, but feel strongly that ESG must be part of that answer. And really, I'm looking forward to learning more throughout the day as we go through the conversations. Lots of thanks. Organising and running this conference is a huge undertaking. We'd not consider it without our amazing supporters and sponsors, so I'd like to publicly recognise and thank all of those that made this possible. First of all, the broad supports are provided by DSIT, Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, and specifically to the University of Plymouth for making this great venue available to us. Our sponsors, gold sponsor in Arctic Wolf, a global leader for security operations, delivering the first cloud-native security operations platform to end cyber risk. As an organisation, they offer an efficient way forward to progressing positive cyber governance. A silver sponsor in C3IA Solutions, an NCSC certified cyber consultancy, providing assured, tailored advice to keep your information secure and data protected. And then two bronze sponsors, GreenSafe IT and Churchill Square Training. GreenSafe IT, you'll hear from later. They're a specialist IT services company and one of the most highly accredited disposal companies in the UK, championing secure, sustainable IT asset disposal. And Churchill Square Training is a Devon-based training and development consultancy that's proud to support the local cyber community. But thank you all for supporting us. Your support makes this conference a success and accessible to all. We're also grateful to Tech Southwest, the Federation of Small Businesses, and the Southwest Cyber Resilience Centre as our media support partners that have helped promote this event, and to UKC3, acting on behalf of DSIT to allocate the base funding that allows us to confidently plan and execute an event like this, exploring new areas for cyber in business and the community. Lastly, we're delighted to partner with Techopian to broaden our reach to the wider ESG community, and fantastic to welcome Michael Baxter of the ESG show, both as a speaker and panel host for our event today. Thank you all for your contributions for making today happen. Lastly, today would not take place without a huge effort behind the scenes. To bring the event together. So my thanks to the team in the cluster itself, particularly Jeff Revel as the driving force behind the event, with support from Chelsea and many others within the cluster. Today you're going to hear some phenomenal content and insights from the talented array of speakers, but there's also huge value in the connections that we make in being open to introductions and conversations in the breaks and the margins. Please build your network and help us grow our cyber community here in the Southwest. I'd also like to close by advertising that we meet online every month. Everyone is very welcome to attend, and we're always keen to welcome new regulars and hear your views on cyber topics and encourage you to present on your area of expertise and interest. Many of the people we hear from today have joined our ecosystem by this route, but above all, you're always all welcome. So thank you, and I'll hand over to Michael.
Thank you. Drop a bit of paper. Hi there, everybody. So I'm hoping that if I click on this, my first slide will come up. But it isn't. Ah, there you go. So that's me. I host regulars on most weeks, online event called the ESG Show. If you look me up on LinkedIn, you'll find it. Now, I don't want to burden you all with my problems, but I bought this suit 2 years ago and I've only worn it twice. So when Jeff told me about this conference, I thought, great, I'll have another opportunity to wear my suit. So I'm so excited to get that opportunity. So thank you for that. I want to tell you about something that happened on September the 5th, 1977. Because on that date, NASA sent the Voyager 1 space probe into space. And the mission was designed to last until 2036, which, if my maths serves me correctly, is, I don't think he's going to serve me correctly, 59 years, I think. So that was quite good long-term thinking for you. And I'll tell you what that has to do with this conference in a few minutes. So what is ESG? Now, I have to tell you that ESG is quite a controversial topic. It stands for environment, social, and governance. But it is controversial. In the US, especially, some people call it anti-capitalism. They call it anti the fiduciary duty of a company. And one person who's particularly vocal in that respect is US TV host Tucker Carlson, who seems to love to hate ESG. And he's joined in his dislike of ESG by the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, who say it is anti-profit. For example, Disney, which you probably know is a major contributor to the economy in Florida, has come under a huge amount of criticism in Florida because of its diversity policies. Now, these people, they call it woke capitalism, wokeism by stealth. But there's another camp. That's one set of people who don't like ESG, but there's another set of people who don't like ESG. And they don't like it because they say it's greenwashing. They say that companies use ESG as a way to put the veneer of being an ethical business behind a smokescreen washed with green colours. Now, oddly enough, they call it a wheeze, a scam. Now, oddly enough, people who work in ESG, they wouldn't call it a scam or a wheeze, but they are truly vexed by the issue of greenwashing, and they hate it when an organisation proclaims its ESG virtues when in fact they only run skin deep and it's not authentic. So the ESG community is very critical of ESG, but they are at least engaged in trying to do something about it. But let me correct a myth about ESG. ESG is not anti-profit. What it is pro-profit maximization in the long term. And in that respect, I guess it has something in common with the views of Warren Buffett and Jeff Bezos, both of whom talk about the importance of long-term thinking. In fact, Warren Buffett once said the best time to hold a stock is forever. Now, that's not to say that Warren Buffett and Jeff Bezos are pro-ESG. I don't know about Jeff Bezos, but Warren Buffett certainly isn't. But at least in that one respect, that emphasis on long-term thinking, they have a lot in common with ESG. In fact, the origin of ESG came as a way to support investors. And it came up as a method for enabling investors to judge the merits of a company they were looking to invest in and to make a profit from their investment because of its environmental and social credentials. So ESG has its origin in capitalism. So what has all this got to do with Voyager 1? Well, that picture gives you a bit of a clue, but I very much doubt whether you can see what's going on in that picture, and I'll explain what it is in just a second. But if you excuse me for a moment whilst I gather my thoughts. So in 1990, the Voyager 1 space probe sent a photograph, took a photograph, and it took a photograph of the planet Earth from 3.7 billion miles. And this was the photograph it took. And our planet, our beautiful planet, the place that has seen dinosaurs, the evolution of mammals, the oceans, the mountains, the place everyone on this planet calls home, teeming with life, showed up as the tiniest pale blue dot. And that was a bit of a penny-dropping moment. Suddenly there was this realization that we cling to this planet protected by this thinnest layer of skin called the atmosphere. And it is so very, very fragile. Now, I don't know how long it is I have been a believer in climate change, but I do distinctly remember that when Margaret Thatcher announced that she believed in climate change, that she looked at the science and she said it was real, I know I was already a believer then. So it was some time before then that I was a believer. But for me, there have been a number of penny-dropping moments on my journey to sort of ESG, I suppose. And the first of those was back in 2008 when I was an economics writer and an economic spokesman for a company, and I was doing a lot of research into the causes of the 2008 crash and trying to understand how the subprime credit bubble could have happened. And it was during that period that I became aware of behavioral science and the idea that humans are not quite as rational as we think we are. And then a few years later, I read the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, who explains how there are two ways of thinking. There's the rational, logical, considered way of thinking, slow thinking, and the more instinctive, fast thinking. But, he said, often our slow thinking just tries to justify what we did instinctively. And it says, oh, we did this because I thought da, 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 da. When in fact, we didn't think anything. We just reacted because it was our instinct. And that instinct is important, of course, because there was a time when we might have been chased by a leopard and we couldn't sit down and work out a strategy as to how to deal with that problem. We responded. But often I think what happens is that we try to justify in hindsight why we did such and such a thing, even though actually we just reacted because it was our instinct. And I think that fast form of thinking makes us vulnerable. It makes us vulnerable to manipulation in an Orwellian or even a Goebbels sense. And it's that vulnerability, I think, that cyber criminals can hack into. And it also plays to ESG, because ESG has an S in it, S for social. Now, my second penny-dropping moment occurred a few years later when I was researching a book on disruptive technology. And I found out that renewables and energy storage appeared to be on an exponential curve, or something similar to that anyway, that the efficiency and the cost was falling at a phenomenal rate. Now, and that made me think of Moore's law. the principle that until recently was describing how computers were doubling in speed every 18 months. And that's quite interesting because a few years ago, the economist Brad DeLong took a look at how computers advance, and he worked out that if in 1957 someone had tried to build a computer with the processing power of the iPhone 10, it would be 300 meters high. It would cost $150 trillion to make. It would have been 300 meters high, 3 kilometers long and wide, and use 150 terawatts of power, which was greater than the world's capacity to generate electricity at that time. And which is, when you think about that, imagine a computer as high as the Shard, but with a footprint the size of the City of London. That's how big a computer you would have needed in 1957 for it to be the equivalent of an iPhone 10. And I've got an iPhone, I don't know what my iPhone is now, I think it's an iPhone 14 or something, so there. So I don't know what size computer you would have needed to emulate that in 1957. But that got me thinking, if renewables can fall at an exponential rate, will that not mean, maybe naively I thought, will that not mean that one day we could actually be better off? Energy could be cheaper thanks to renewables? Well, it turned out that other people, a lot smarter than me, also thought that as well. Although, of course, renewables are also very controversial, and there's no shortage of haters. But it does bring me back to that rather important point that ESG is as much an opportunity as it is something that you have to do. It's, of course it makes sense to be sustainable. Of course it makes sense to try and reduce waste. Of course it makes sense to try and reuse components that have been used before. And of course energy can get cheaper if it continues to fall at an exponential rate. And indeed it's pretty much there now. It's pretty much at parity already. My next penny dropping moment came a few years later when I found myself hosting a couple of conferences on GDPR. It's about the time when GDPR came out, just before, and I edited a couple of editions of a data protection magazine. And I became very attached to the concept of privacy by design and default, as defined by Dr. Anne Cofounder, privacy officer at the time in Ontario. And this concept of privacy by design, I kind of like that idea. And a couple of years later, I edited a magazine called Information Age. And doing that, I wrote about digital transformation. I wrote about cybersecurity. I wrote about robotics process information. And I wrote about ethical AI. And everyone kept saying it's the same thing to me. They kept saying, yeah, but unless the C-suite take this seriously, it's not going to go anywhere. This principle, whether it was cybersecurity, ethical AI, responsible use of thinking, responsible use of technology, or agile thinking, had to be ingrained into the corporate structure of a company. And so I kind of like the idea of by design, but security by design, ethical AI by design, ethical use of data by design, responsible use of technology by design, agile thinking by design, and ESG by design. And this is where ESG enters the story. Now, the overlap with E, I think of that as being more to do with the environmental cost of cyber attacks, and indeed the environmental cost of fighting cyber attacks as well. And indeed, we've got a speaker later today who's talking rather intriguingly about how you can dispose of hardware in an environmentally friendly way. But the S bit of ESG brings me to the topic of behavioural science. And I think that's rather fundamental. All of us have biases. We all have heuristics, the most famous of which is the confirmation bias. And I think the S in ESG is about trying to create a culture, a human culture within an organisation. And a part of that has to be aware of that behavioural angle of cyber. Then there's the G bit of ESG, the governance. And there's two kind of levels to that. There are various standards. There's the Sustainability Accounting Standard, for example, SASB. I think I've gone ahead a little bit of my presentation here. I've gone way ahead of the game, but anyway, not that it really matters. So I looked up the SASB standard, and I found that the word cyber was mentioned 58 times. Then there are regulations. The EU has been leading the way with regulations in this field, just as it did with GDPR. It's got something called the Green New Deal, and among those regulations that it launched is the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, or the CSDDD. And this requires organisations to vet their supply chain thoroughly, both for environmental and human rights factors. And it applies to any organisation that trades in the EU. And the fines for failing to do so can be very severe, 5% of global turnover. And in the case of France, there's even talk about jail sentences for executives who do not follow the regulation. Now, later today, we're going to be hearing from someone who works with the UK government on not so much a regulation, but on guidelines, but in cyber security. But I suspect cyber will be going in a similar route. But it seems to me that all these concepts, whether they are cyber security, digital transformation, ethical AI, and ESG, they kind of need to be brought together. A bit like the one ring, you know? You need one ring to rule them all. One ring to find all that data. One ring to bring all these concepts together and in the brightness of the sun, bind them. And I believe that this pale blue dot needs ESG, and I think cyber is an integral part of that. Thank you. I'll now try and catch up with this presentation. There you go. Thank you. Who's the next speaker? Hello, me. Marti. Oh, here we are.
Yeah, thank you.
Give any questions. Oh, yeah.
Hi, I'm Marti Burgess. I'm a lawyer work at a firm called Knights, one of the largest regional law firms in the country. We've got an office in Exeter, but I'm based in Bristol. I'm not a tech lawyer. I think there's a tech lawyer speaking later, so I can't answer any real technical questions about how it cyber and relates to the law, particularly in it. But what I can talk about is ESG. I'm going to talk about ESG. And so Michael touched on it, the origins of ESG. I mean, I consider really the government started to take a real interest when they signed up to the UN Sustainability Development Goals. And I think this is the bit where it kind of links with woke capitalism. Essentially, the belief is that if the world is going to be a better place for us all to live in, we need to sign up to governments had to sign up to some sort of ambition around what does that mean for people. And the 5 pillars of the Sustainable Development Goals are people, planet, peace, prosperity and partnerships. And these are the full 17, and they really, out of that, has flowed most of the regulations around ESG. And it's a global thing. It's not just this country looking at it, or just in Europe. It's pretty much everybody globally, even countries that you kind of think of as less responsible also have ambition around the Sustainable Development Goals, because they also have obviously people and they also live on the planet. So it's not something that there's probably any country that doesn't think this is important, but how they deal with it is different, and how they deal with it in terms of how they interrelate with each other is different. So what? And I kind of thought of this from the perspective of who's in the room, and I've made some assumptions that some of you are working for your own businesses and you're selling services to others in and around cybersecurity. And in that sense, hopefully you'll leave today with some more, something else to use in your pitches to people. And then if you're working inside a corporation and you're their cybersecurity manager, then you'll be able to leave and give an even more arguments, speak to the people you work with to say why what you do is important. And then if you're really focused in a company and your ESG is your thing, then obviously, hopefully, you'll be able to understand how and why cyber security is important. So the E in ESG, as Michael said, it's the environment. So 64% of companies acknowledge that they consider climate change as a risk to their business. That shows that how important the E is. Cyber attacks can endanger the environment. If somebody were able to access a power plant infrastructure and cause a lot of destruction could happen. I mean, I live in the West like you all do. I mean, if you imagine somebody attacking a power plant in Bridgewater and it causing a sort of causing a problem, then you can see how that can impact on the community there and also on our ability to have power. Most plans around decarbonisation and CO2 reduction is going to have to use technology. It's not something that can just be sort of mechanically solved. It's going to be technological solutions, and with those solutions become even more ways for people to even more ways for, if you're a cyber criminal, to access a company's access a company. So and then technology involving financial transactions, again, it just leaves it more open to new types of fraud. Security has to be embedded into all of these programs to help anticipate cyber threats and ensure safe and secure operations. We've all GDPR, data protection principles, something I think most people understand, that protecting data is essential. And the digital economy has led to a surge of data processing, which has resulted in more data centres and these big server centres. And again, those do not necessarily have a positive impact on the environment. So I think people have to think about, as technology, our increasing use of technology, it can have a negative impact on the environment. And then is that balance. Security is important, but the environment's important, and I think that's going to be a real focus on how we can achieve the right amount of balance between the two. The S, and this is kind of the real bit which I find the most interesting, in the sense that what you do, because this is the people bit, right? So this is most important in terms of what we do in terms of if you're running a business. Someone said to me that most young people, when they are looking at where they work, they're not really as interested in what they get paid, but they're also interested in the culture of the place they work. And I think that's the social bit. It's really important to have a good culture, being looking after people's data and working for a business that has a good reputation. So I think there's a stat there. KPMG 2022 found that 49% of companies acknowledge social elements as a risk to their business. And obviously, the more technology is used, it leaves the businesses more open to vulnerable cyber risks. Theft of personal and sensitive information can result in identity theft, financial fraud, and other social harms. So to address these risks, organisations really need to have strong policies around protection of people's data and protection of sensitive information, and you need robust plans to minimise the impact of cyber attacks, combat ransomware attacks and those seeking to disrupt for political reasons. I worked at a law firm 5 years ago, had a ransom attack. Fortunately, I was on holiday, but three days of work didn't... nobody could work for 3 days, and that is, in terms of productivity, that's huge. One, it was hugely embarrassing. As I said, I was on holiday, so I fortunately didn't have to have any embarrassing conversations with clients, but lots of my colleagues did, and so and I can imagine how much something like that would impact on the businesses you work for. AI, this is another use of algorithms. There's going to be a new UK framework how to ensure AI is used in a way that does not harm. I should imagine there's going to be lots of regulations coming down the line, in the same way that with data, there are lots of regulations to govern the way we treat people's data. And then I kind of wanted to talk a bit about how social value and public procurement. So if you're running a side business or any business, and you want to supply services to the public sector, you now, more often than not, particularly if there is a high value contract, you have to when you're tendering for this business, you have to explain how your business is, what your ESG credentials and metrics around that are. And the kind of categories, and there are more now, because I know that recently sort of a climate reduction plans, you have to report what you're doing in order to ensure that you're not damaging the environment. But one of the questions around, will your services and business help local communities and impact positively on them? And it asks questions about what you're doing to tackle economic inequality, what you're doing to fight climate change, and what you're doing in terms of equal opportunities, diversity and inclusion, and well-being. And some of these, the weightings now are getting higher and higher. So if you're a really good candidate for and you're pitching to a public sector, if the weighting is 15 to 20% on what your social value model is, it could be the difference that makes you get the contract or not. Because if you might have a great service, but if you're not doing anything which has a positive impact on the community you're intended to work for, or you're having a negative impact on the environment, then you might not get that contract. And then the G, this is I'm a corporate lawyer, so this is the bit which is really kind of what the focus for me is on in my sort of day-to-day job. I think it underpins it all. Governance is the system by which companies are directed and controlled. Section 172 of the Companies Act, if you're a director, you've got to have the company's interest you've got to promote the best interest of the company. If you're not looking after, if you're not looking after the data that the company's storing, or if you're not looking after your stakeholders, your employees, etc., then you're probably in breach of you could be seen to be breach of Section 172. And then governance is also an indicator of how the culture of the organisation, how important cybersecurity is seen and how it's perceived goes, the core of that culture. If you're seen as somebody who's not very responsible with people's data, then you're not. I would argue that you don't really care about one of your most important stakeholders, either your customers or your employees. Without the proper protections and monitoring and training in place, a business could go under, and investments, lose investments. And poor corporate governance practices really have been at the heart of some of the largest corporate scandals in and around the ESG space. So, it's just, I would say, just good governance. And it's estimated that 40% of all boards of directors will have a dedicated cybersecurity committee or person by 2025. And actually, when I saw that statistic, I thought it was probably quite light. I think it's probably going to be going to be higher than that within the next few years, particularly with the, I know you've got someone speaking later who's talking about the government guidance. I think particularly when you look at something like the guidance coming down the line, even when you look at the advice for small companies, I can see that it's going to be something that is going to be increasingly important, and I think more companies will have someone at board level who's looking after this area. So why do lawyers care about it in considering their clients? Well, the thing for me is due diligence. So if I'm acting for a purchase of a business, we're going to ask questions around what does that business do to protect data, protect, not ensuring there's no backdoor left open. I recently concluded a deal which was a business was purchased by BAE Systems. It was some they're manufacturing a piece of kit which is very relevant now in the sort of new way people fight wars, and the due diligence around the cyber actually let kind of the whole deal stopped whilst the specialists were really going into the company, and they found a piece of kit it had produced 15 years ago wasn't as probably secure as it could have been, and the deal stalled whilst the client had to come up with the solutions around this piece of technology. So when you're looking to get investment or someone's going to purchase your business, they really do go to town on this whole area, particularly around deal I'm working on now has just spent a good 2 days on the environmental section on the due diligence. The client we're acting for the purchaser. The other side said, do your own investigations. Not really good enough in this day and age. People want to know the answers. They don't want to take they don't want to take a business on where there's weaknesses around the environment. And then the new requirements for data reporting in contracts. So, it's more likely than not that people will be ensuring that they want to ensure their supply chain is free of things like modern slavery, free of things where there's a risk of an environmental issue. And so it's more, as companies, you're having to report to more and more people, as well as the reporting you have to do on a statutory basis. You have to report to your customer. And the bad news story. So I'm sure we've all read various news stories about data leaks. It really has a huge impact on a company's reputation if there is a data. I mean, one of the worst calls you can get as a lawyer is somebody calling you up saying they've had a complaint from the ICO because it's you don't know where it's going to lead to. If it's going to be something small or it's going to be something which the client could end up with a sort of large fine. And the other reason lawyers are interested, new regulations need unpicking and explaining, and the regimes are just getting. It generally starts. The larger companies have to report on the statute, and then it does just trickle down until every small SME is having to report. Okay, that's me done. Thank you.
We're going to get better at this now, I promise. Thank you, Marti. Really good. And I think that really linked with what Mike had already said, and it's starting to sort of really take shape in my mind. So our next speaker is Durgan from Juberi Group.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, nice to see you. You can always tend to find the average age of your audience by asking that question at the start. Good morning, my name is Durgan Cooper. Where is the thing? Okay, so I'm a bit of a technical interlude into this day, a bit of a notes from the field. By way of background, I've worked within cybersecurity, IT for 25 years, and one of my companies looks after about 45 building management systems around Canary Wharf and the City of London. And just picking up on Marti's point, we also look after a nuclear power station up near Bridgewater and the cybersecurity around that during the build phase. So, you know, quite important buildings. And certainly when looking at smart buildings in the corporate real estate sector, typically within financial services, we all think that banks have our money, and we hope that they are well protected. They protect our money. But certainly, for many years, it's been identified the actual infrastructure that supports the building, the life support systems and so on within them has been the soft underbelly. And what we've certainly seen over the last 6 years since WannaCry is a huge amount of investment to shore up those operational technology systems. So who are Juberi and why Juberi? So Juberi is a joint venture, essentially. It is a startup. We have been going a very short while, and we've just picked up our first client in Manhattan, a top 5 law firm, global law firm, with 35 offices globally, and we are helping them assure their integration of a true smart building. And I say true smart building because smart buildings allegedly, or intelligent buildings and other names exist, have been around for a long, long time. But this is probably the most up-to-date smart building that I've seen. And what we identified during COVID is where these organizations are looking at their ESG. It's been around for a while, as Michael suggested. They're looking about how they interconnect all their systems globally, protect them, and so on. So why Juberi? What we've done is we've smashed together sort of the technical side, the IT services, supporting infrastructure, the cybersecurity, to protect it all and manage services around that, but also the actual building services architecture, creating what we hope to be a one-stop shop for those corporate real estate owners, occupiers, to be able to have one throat to choke, so to speak. So one asks the question, what is a smart building? Now, I have brought some notes to keep me on the straight and narrow and not go down rabbit holes, but a smart building is one that basically uses technology efficiently and economically and enables economic use of resources whilst creating a safe and comfortable environment for its occupants. It contains things such as the energy management to ensure that energy is being used efficiently, be that electric or gas. The bills would make your eyes water in terms of some of these buildings and what they can, what their costs are, and any way that they can use to reduce those, obviously, are very much well received for their shareholders. HVAC, these buildings often are obviously hermetically sealed, so there's a huge risk to life if some of these systems go offline for any period of time. Notwithstanding, a smart building cannot be occupied, obviously, if its alarms or fire alarms are unable to be utilised. Occupant comfort, so obviously that whole integration between the user going into the building, ordering coffees to rooms, booking rooms, turning the lights down, setting blinds and so on. So just a huge connection between all these independent systems which are now coming together. So what is driving this evolution? So I asked the question, ESG and cyber, or is it actually cyber and ESG? Because the two are so heavily intertwined now. As I've suggested, there's risk to human health. Typically, the IT teams within these corporate environments, they run away as soon as, well, for anyone watching or in the room, forgive me, they tend to run away when operational technology comes into play because of that whole risk to life. You can't do cyber essentials on an operational technology system due to that. But as was previously suggested, public and shareholder perception is a huge driver. Regulation is coming. Certainly in the EU, we have the Digital Operational Resilience Act coming in January next year, where essentially banks, large global institutions are going to be compelled to actually demonstrate their resilience to potential risk. Tax is a big one. So ultimately, where banks, where large organisations who operate across many jurisdictions globally, they are anticipating that they're going to be taxed from one jurisdiction to another. So that global footprint is one of the big drivers. But ultimately for that, they need secure systems. They can't have data manipulated, which could affect the value, the costs that they will incur. But also, they obviously need that secure data exchange between those systems. So I'm going to give a quick rundown of a case study in a moment. What are the challenges? Well, sort of tying into the case study, often, well, in today's world, our IT, Michael's got an iPhone 14, I've got a 15. You know, we upgrade our IT regularly. Within operational technology, that equipment often can sit in place for decades. And of course, that obsolescence of technology is very costly to maintain. So legacy systems is a key problem. Connecting those systems, often they don't have Ethernet. So you need to use BACnet, and different protocol bridges to actually connect to those legacy systems to start getting the meter readings and so on off. And obviously then you've got that whole centralization across the world, where typically these systems were designed regionally, so they have different systems in different regions, in different countries, in different buildings. So you can see that trying to connect all of those disparate systems together to have one view is going to be rather difficult. And obviously, those systems, let's be blunt, weren't designed to be secure. They were designed for operational necessity. So one of the big problems that we've encountered over the last couple of years is obviously just simple IP addressing. We have a client who connected a system in Singapore to identify that they were using duplicate IP addresses to another country. The system broke. So these things need to actually come back a step and be architected from the ground up with huge investment in all that re-IP addressing and so on. What we have done, and as suggested, we are a startup, is we've created a Juberi journey to enable our clients to actually understand where they are and what they need to do. So again, this is a bit of a technical process that we've taken through. We start by assessment. If it's a greenfield site, wonderful. We can design from the ground up. But more often than not, as suggested, it's got legacy systems which need to be evolved and integrated. So often we start with a pen test to essentially establish what is there. We go through to the IT/OT network and help with that design work, and hence that joint venture of our partner company coming in and actually doing that design. More importantly, we wrap it with cybersecurity. We provide middleware to help bring the data in from disparate sources and enable that analytics to take place. We then have user integration. As suggested, I mean, a nice sort of little thing is sort of in London, in Canary Wharf, you've got a place called Boysdales, and we always sort of joke around that the traders are sat there having a few drinks and turning all the lights on and off in the building, which cannot happen. And then finally, we're looking at certification. So essentially what we have done is, this is a proof of concept. We're currently running it in a bank who are actually in the case study in a second, where essentially we've smashed together IEC 62443, which gained notoriety after the Colonial Pipeline a few years ago in the US. So essentially all organizations, critical infrastructure organizations in the US have to comply with IEC 62443. But we've also incorporated NIST, sadly not the latest version, that's a bit of a rework, and ISO 27001. And essentially enables our clients where their corporate IT also want to have visibility because of the interconnected risk for the user and the systems. So we've amalgamated those into currently a spreadsheet as a proof of concept, but it's moving into an app in the near future. So a quick rattle through a case study. So we have a global bank, 3,000 sites. First and foremost, little IT service management, ITSM, on the operational network. So they have obviously big, what do they use? I can't remember. The big system, IT service management tool, but the OT side of the organisations are not able to use it. They have no porting schedules. So this is all basic stuff. They have not a record comprehensively of what is connected into which port, in which switch, in which building, and so on. DHCP, they have static IP addressing, making any changes where I was suggesting they need to re-IP address, everything has got to be done manually at the device more often than not. They've got a global SD-WAN architecture to implement. So huge connectivity between all these buildings. The corporate network don't want the operational technology information transiting through the corporate network. So we're designing them an SD-WAN solution for 3,000 sites. We're creating, obviously, a global IP schema, and more importantly, at a root level, a global access and identity management system to incorporate both employed staff, facilities management staff, and obviously third-party contractors as they come into the organisation to integrate new stuff. So a big job. Oh, and then obviously beyond that, next page, cyber awareness training and a NOC, a SOC, and a BOC, a building operations centre. So huge amounts of investment going in. So you can see that ESG is playing a critical part in driving this, and why. The long-term benefits. Now, certainly, for those who haven't used Microsoft Copilot in Office, I actually asked Copilot to create or put in the pictures. I don't know what this one is. I'm assuming it's sell the sizzle, not the sausage. But nevertheless, so we have environmental. Obviously, the environmental reduction in energy usage and carbon footprint, as I suggested, there's likely to be taxes there. Smart building management, being able to identify proactively that there's a problem in a foreign country from a building operations centre before its occupants become aware of it. So that's environmental. We have social, data privacy, obviously connected users into that system, so the users need to feel protected. And more importantly, workplace safety. Again, where there is a huge risk to life by many of these systems, they need to be working, maintained, monitored, and alarms reacted to, of course. And then governance, regulatory compliance, it's coming fast. Risk management is obviously a huge driver, so the banks, but other business types are available, are all looking at their risk management profile in terms of regulation and DORA and so on. So the overall impact is sustainable business processes, as was suggested by Marti. You know, productivity loss of 8,000 people in a building is quite significant to these organisations. But most importantly, it's about trust. Back to Marti's point again, the shareholder, the public perception of an organisation. Who do I bank with? I bank with those that I trust and love. So thank you very much. My name is Durgan Cooper. I think we're going to have no Q&A.
We are, sort of. Thanks, Nick.
I tried to run through that.
Yeah, Durgan, thank you for building. Sorry, they don't get any better than that. It's a concrete example to lead with. So, Durgan, please stay. Marti, if you'd like to come back up. And Jeff and Michael will take us into our first panel session on this cyber to ESG.
Thank you. Ooh. Right, well, welcome back, everybody. Before we get going, Jeff, I was wondering if you could just quickly summarise, in the world according to Jeff, what you think ESG and cybersecurity have in common.
Hiya. It's just a quick introduction to make sure everyone knows who I am. I'm Jeff Revel. I'm I kind of led the organisation of this event. So I'm a director of the Southwest Cybersecurity Cluster. My day job is I lead up a company called Safe Space One, and we're building out a platform for truly confidential information exchanges in and around health consultations. So privacy by design, security by design, and indeed confidentiality by design is something that we're really focused on. And they really link to a lot of ESG issues. So if we come round to the general question for E, S, and G. So on the environmental side, simple example would be 60% of the data that we currently hold on the internet, which is measured in the zettabillions or something, I can't remember what it is. It's trillions of gigabytes of data out there right now. 60% of it isn't being used. So that means 60% of the disk space, power, consumption, and everything else going on is wasted energy. So simple stuff. But where that links to cyber is a basic requirement of GDPR as a principle is data minimization. And if a lot of that data is personal, I'm sorry, but we're not achieving a really simple goal for ESG. If we're not looking at the data that we got that's sitting resident that could get hacked, that we're not even touching or looking at right now. So that's the E side of it. The societal side, I think it all shouldn't really be something we need to discuss. Society and digital are now so integral in everything we do, and so much information is being collated all of the time. Those that are collating it, managing it, sharing it, I would have thought it was blatantly obvious that we have a direct responsibility to protect those people whose information we are managing as part of a societal goal. And I think that's fairly straightforward. Governance, we're going to hear more about in the next session, as you know, but just to sort of tip the wink on that, essentially, those that don't know about it, there is new regulation coming in from the government. It might come in now. I guess we'll have to wait and see, given the election changes and what needs to get through. But I don't know if that's effective. We'll have to ask them. But it's going to make it very clear that cyber governance is a responsibility of every director, of every organisation, just in the same way as fiduciary and financial responsibilities are there. And so the posture that you take in governing your business is something that's going to become, shall we say, culturally changed. You can't hand off to some department that sits somewhere else that you never hear from unless it goes wrong. These people need to be brought to the foreground and their voices heard in the boardrooms. So I think, you know, E and S and G are all very strongly cyber issues now.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So we've had some questions, and can we have some examples of where ESG and cyber issues connect? Have any of you got any examples?
I think Durgan just went through one, so you might want to...
Yeah, you just went through one. Just do your talk again, Durgan.
Yeah, how long have we got? Well, no, samples. Yeah, all of these organisations are having this issue about centralisation of data. I mean, I think that's the biggest sort of takeaway. They are going to be taxed. Inevitably, their shareholding or shareholders are going to make informed decisions, due diligence decisions about where they put their money. So that is where the interconnect between them, for me, occurs. I mean, obviously, we need to protect these systems anyway, but interestingly, it's not being, the investment, the budget creation is not being driven by technological or cybersecurity aims, it's their ESG. So.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Next question. What are some of the wider implications if organisations overlook cyber-related ESG issues? Have any of you got any thoughts on that one? Marti, you look very
I kind of touched on it before, but the reputational aspect, I think people shouldn't underestimate. If you've got a business and you're as a high-profile data breach, or there's a high-profile, you're the cause of something malfunctioning in a really important bit of the country's infrastructure, then I think you can't, you know, that would be really damaging to any business. And then, I mean, you know, just look at some of the news stories around accessing of people's, you know, some of the Prince Harry, the young girl who got murdered, and the newspapers tapped into their phones. That was because of really low-level password protection. I mean, which is, God, I can't remember the life of me, the piece of regulation that came in on April the 29th. But now any manufacturer of products is that you can't have it so that somebody can easily get into your with a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 password, which is pretty common when you first buy something, and not many of us change it. I mean, I'm terrible at protecting stuff. Unless I have to protect it, I probably just go with whatever is the piece of the password that's given to me. So I think just I know all of those are around the sort of S side of it, but I think that's one of if you look at it as the wider implications of if you overlook it, that somebody's going to try and find the person responsible, and if you're at the end of the line of responsibility, then you're going to have to deal with the fallout.
Yeah, let's talk about that fallout. When I started Safe Space One, my concern at the time, the issue I wanted to address, was the lack of attention to the cybersecurity issues that, frankly, digital mental health tools were accommodating or not accommodating. And shortly after that, there was an announcement of a major breach of a public sector supplier in Finland whose systems were hacked and using mental health, and thousands of people were blackmailed and some people committed suicide. So very sadly. That is terrible. And if you want to talk about reputational damage, that's about as bad as it can get, and it can get that bad. The Ashley Madison, if people remember that social platform that was hacked, people committed suicide. There were deaths resultant from that. So at the worst extreme, those are where you can get to if you're not looking at it. I'm glad to say that for the first time, a GDPR breach resulted in a suspended prison sentence for the director of that company in Finland. That's a first, as far as I'm aware. Hopefully there'll be some more. But when I started Safe Space One, I didn't really know how bad things were. But in Bristol, there's a privacy organisation for Bristol University, which is stood up by the government, called Refrain, REPHRAIN, for those who want to look it up. And as an assessment exercise, they went and tested 27 mental health apps against privacy standards as well as security standards. All 27 failed on an average of 22 confidential information losses. And that's meant to be for people who are highly vulnerable in their lives. So if we're not holding ourselves to that kind of standard, we're talking serious consequences. And I've really raised that bar, but actually it comes down to something as simple as a cookie. Facebook cookie on certain NHS Trust websites crept in there, and suddenly Facebook knew that you were looking up information around your mental health, and that became part of your social profile, which then drove adverts to you associated with that, which frankly is also unacceptable. And the way I look at things, if I want to know if a business I'm engaging with actually takes a positive stance, the first thing I do is I look at their cookies on their website. And I look at their cookie policy to see if they're trying to protect me, and I look at their cookies they actually do to see if they're succeeding in doing that. And when I did assessment of that, 70 mental health websites, a third of them were actively recruiting my data and selling it, a third were trying not to but failing, and about a third were doing a reasonable job. And that's in mental health. So how bad is it out there? It's pretty bad.
Okay, so that's quite scary. I think also there's regulations as well. You know, the EU regulations, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, is making it, I don't know if it's in law yet, but organisations that trade in the EU have to know certain things about their supply chain. And I would have thought cyber is an important part of that. Anyhow, next question. How can cyber professionals better emphasise the externalities of security standards to ESG? Any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think sort of this ties in with the previous question. It's about willful negligence at a director C level, having that intent from the board often doesn't exist. The fact that we are all here and anyone who joins us remotely is here means that we're all aware. So how do IT professionals bang the drum? It's about user education. Users need to take a good level of responsibility. Coming back to the social side, people don't realise that poor soul who clicks the email which instigates an attack. You know, the mental and psychological difference that places on the individual is absolutely immense. So it's about training. For me, it's all about training in the context of the risk to that organisation. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. You have to contextualise, but also provide a good layer of broad protection for individuals themselves. Coming back to the point about the password changes, I mean, I've been in London this week in Parliament lobbying for those vendors to actually provide training to the consumers. So who pays for training? I believe it should be the vendors to actually implement part of their product, some training.
I think as regulation and guidance comes in from the government, pleased to see that happening, it becomes a leadership issue. So first of all, step one, keep lobbying internally to get somebody at the board level who actually understands this stuff. We do know how complex it is, how difficult it is to get your head around. The new governance that's coming in is set to kind of help people understand the principles without having to understand the tech. And so I think if anything we can do as cyber professionals to assist in that is to stop talking tech and talk about the principles that we're trying to achieve. That will help communicate upwards to the executive. And then exactly saying on the training, and we have got a speaker on that later, it's about the behaviour of people within the organisation, and they're going to take that from their leadership.
I completely agree about the point about stop talking tech. Cyber has... Hollywood always portrays cyber as being something fantastically complicated, and you get some guy who's a nerd and no one understands them, but they're a genius and they can type ever so quickly. And that's the image of cybersecurity to the public. But actually, there's so much more to it than that. There's just a tiny bit of it. And the whole social aspect of it is something that I don't think people appreciate. But you're going to say something, Marti?
Yeah, I think just articulate which is what you just said, is make sure you articulate in a way people understand. I mean, as lawyers, we tend to use scare stories, and I think there are sufficient scare stories out there that you can tell people. This could be, particularly senior executives, this could be you having the person to stand up and have to explain it to your customers or the people whose data has been breached. So yeah, the articulation of what the possibility could be is important.
Yeah, I had a dream about a scare story last night. I dreamt that we were going to have 6 weeks of electoral campaigning, and I woke up and I discovered it was real. But anyway, okay, so we are pretty much, we've got kind of got 2 or 3 minutes to go, but I think we'll try to squeeze in the questions if that's okay. Sorry? Sorry, Jeff?
You'd ask the room.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I know there are. How can companies take cyber in ESG more seriously? How do we sell it to the board? So it's this get the C-suite to take it seriously question. How do you do that?
It's a funny one. As a director of businesses, one knows about your product. You often know about marketing, you often know about finance, and so you go around the business. And it seems that when it gets to technology and cybersecurity, it's deferred to someone else. So I think that's absolutely key. As has already been suggested, people taking responsibility and understanding, if not the technical aspects, but certainly understanding the implications. Often when I speak to clients, they ask, how do I protect myself? And I ask the question, what is it you're trying to protect? You know, everyone's crown jewels are different. notwithstanding public perception, shareholder value, and so on. But certainly, is it data? Is it a physical product, and so on? So it's just understanding at that C-level what is critical to the organisation and understanding how best, or what the options are. There is never one silver bullet.
Yeah, I think that's completely true. I mean, your talk, the reason we asked you to do this talk was to bring people's awareness and understanding that cyber is more than just the digital world, it's the physical world, and they interact directly with one another. So, you know, you're not trying to say this is something that's over there. This is something that's part of the building we live in, right? As you said, it's hermetically sealed, right? So, you know, there are safety issues as well as security issues around that, and the access rights to that. So I think it's about just kind of getting that understanding at the C-level. And I think the best way to think about that is to put it on the agenda at the regular board level, because information, current government assessments show that most businesses rarely discuss it more than once a year, which is in a system and world where everything changes so fast, that's way too slow. You know, you're not on top of things if you're putting it on the board once a year to tick a box. It's got to become part of the active narrative at the leadership level.
Okay, and I guess also it's emphasising the opportunity. It's not just a defensive thing. There's a business opportunity to do that, and I suppose nothing makes a C-suite pick up more than the thought, oh, yeah, it's an opportunity for us. Marti, were you about to add?
Well, I was going to go on to the next question, but
go ahead.
yeah, is there a source where you can look up? Not as far as I'm aware, but there are various kite marks and things which people sign up to. So, and there, you know, on an S level, you can look at there's things like the living wage policy. That's a good, for me, and a good S mark around a company. There's things, various charters. I know in Bristol we've got the Women's Charter. If you signed up to that, you're seen as a company that's looking after its women employees. There's the ICSO marks, I think, which are a good indicator. And so, yeah, I you know, it's asking questions, but I mean, I think that would be a really good thing to have an ESG. I know that, again, people who've signed up to net zero, they tend to publicise that. So I don't think there's an all size fits one ESG score for a company, but there are various kite marks that people can sign up to, which give you an indication of whether they have, whether they're you know, taking ESG seriously.
I think there are organisations. One, there's sustainability.
Yeah, that's just, I mean, that's an E, isn't it? I don't think there's anything which covers everything. But
I was just looking at Unilever has a score of 23.8 medium, 25 out of 111. Sustainalytics is the name I was trying to remember.
A lot of companies now, especially in the professionals sector, will have a page. You know, that used to be the CSR, which kind of ESG is like the CSR child, but that, you know, will talk about their company and what they do. But I mean, Michael, you talked about it, the greenwashing. There's always that risk of what people say they do, but people where there's an independent kite mark, I think that's a good indicator of whether they're taking things seriously or not. But yeah, it's definitely something, an opportunity for somebody, perhaps an ESG sort of certification would be good.
Well, the whole ESG score thing is very controversial. I know there was a few years ago when Tesla had a worse ESG score than an oil company, for example.
Yeah, and because the social value and the modelling around that, I mean, I've spoken to people who are coming up with how to assess that independently. It's really hard because there's so many subjective indicators in there. How do you come up with something which is sort of independent, and it's quite a difficult one because of stuff like that. I mean, that's ridiculous.
But it kind of is, but then in the same token, I'm not sure I'd want to work for Elon Musk.
No, I know. I mean, on the S level, you probably fail quite hard.
Okay, and then we can we talk about how we're doing for time? We're over time. Okay, how about if we quickly ask this question, but I ask you to answer super fast, and then we'll see if anybody here's got a question. Can you talk about the internationalisation of ESG, in particular for Durgan's case study of generalised OT requirements for different countries' regions? Durgan, do you have an answer to that in about 45 seconds?
Let me just try and work out the question.
It takes 45 seconds to read it.
I don't know who asked the question, but I don't know if there could be a bit more... I'm sorry?
Talk about having 35 buildings around the world that you have to cater for. So you have a general set of risks, requirements, different world, different...
Well, not... OK, no, understood. Well, not yet. I mean, certainly, yeah, as I suggested in Manhattan, this particular organisation, it's their first smart building. They have smart technologies in other buildings, but this is their trophy site. They're moving premises in London in the next 2 years, which will be of a similar standard. So, yes, what they will be looking to do, obviously, is draw back that data sooner rather than later from all those disparate systems, but they are going to be putting identical systems into other sites.
What I'm asking about, how do you take these requirements, put it in the other sites, which may be in different countries, they have different requirements, different law around their buildings?
Yes.
Has this been addressed yet? I'm interested to know.
Not well, you know, being blunt, we're not involved at an international level at this stage, although we're just signing frameworks. But certainly, yeah, their internal governance will define that. They are creating the standards, and dare I say it, most of the organisations are still just creating their standards to be able to align and identify. You're absolutely right. In parts of the world, it's hot. They need cooling. In parts of the, in the UK, we need heating. So, different countries.
And I imagine the controls will be very different.
Well, exactly that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we're out of time now. We were going to cover one other story, and I think I'll just quickly summarise it. A survey recently found out that a total of 312 senior IT decision makers from across the UK, Germany and Netherlands participated in research. And the resulting document found that 75% of the C-suite executives who participated in the poll acknowledged that having a full pro sustainability strategy helps attract and retain top talent. Or 59% did that. But the data also showed that 67% of organisations are oblivious to the environmental consequences of their data storage strategies. So there you go. Thank you very much. See you all in half an hour? Quarter to. All right. Thank you.